Hello, my name's Anna Norden and I'm the head at Swavesey Primary School. And I'm going to talk to you today about my top tips and triggers for school-based research and the impact that this has on the provision for our children and the development of my staff. So I'm going to start by sharing my screen. I have a short presentation which will first of all hopefully keep me to time and give us some things to think about. So for me, my journey into active research in schools started as a fairly young teacher, where I wanted to move my children's learning forward, but didn't necessarily have the tools, the ideas, and the systems available to me to be able to do that. And it particularly came to a head one day for me when I remember talking to the children about their thinking processes. And I remember saying to a child about, come on, let's think about it. And I recognized in that moment that actually they didn't know how to think about it. They weren't sure how to undertake that process. And I realized that what I needed to do for my children was to provide them with the skills and the strategies to be able to think through the problems, through the activities, so that they had much better ownership of what we were asking them to do. Now, this was in the days where we'd moved into the literacy strategy and the numeracy strategy, and we had lots of documents to support and help us. We had a variety of interventions, the early literacy, the additional literacy, the further literacy. We had numeracy strategy books with mental calculation processes, and many of these things were scripted, and many of these things were very, very prescriptive. Now, as a leading literacy teacher for many years, I spent time delivering training for some of these literacy interventions, but I was always a firm believer that they needed to be done in such a way that it worked for the children that it was being delivered to, and in the school that it was being delivered in, not just per se exact to the script. And in fact, these things came with very prescriptive scripts for the adults to read. And we had these things, but actually none of these things were going to help my child and my children to learn to think about things, to have that ownership of their own thought processes. And so I wanted more. Now, I was very lucky. I worked for a head teacher who was very passionate about her staff being proactive and was really passionate about us, undertaking research in our classrooms for the benefit of our children in our class or the whole school. So I began to explore things, and at that time I looked at the campaign for learning. At that particular time it didn't have quite the same 5 R's. One of them was remembering rather than responsibility. And I looked at things like Edward Bono's thinking hats. I looked at other methodologies behind thinking, and I particularly became very passionate about metacognition, and in the end this led me to undertaking my master's for primary education, and metacognition was the focus for my main research, and it has continued to be something that I am passionate about. And every school that I have been in since I started this, I have revisited the metacognition and I have revisited the 5 R's. But the one thing that I have found is that because the children are different, because the schools are different, because the communities those schools are in are different, because the staff are different, I've had to come to it anew each time and restart in some respects that action research. So for me, what's really important is that even though we might continue to focus on one particular thing, as we move into a new school, the outcome may be slightly different, even though the initial premise may be the same starting point. And therefore, what is really important to me is the rationale as to why we do it. So we do it because our children's needs are all different. And for every group of children that I've taught, they are a different entity. I always remember in my very first 2 years of teaching, I taught straight year two straight year five classes, and they were in a school in Kent. And my very first class were incredibly artistic. They were sort of innately creative children. And so I delivered the curriculum and planned and, thought to myself, these are amazing things. I can do these next year because I've got the same curriculum and I've got another group of year 5 children. But I was wrong. Actually, the next group were completely different personalities, children with completely different needs. And so I couldn't just roll out what I'd done before. I had to think about it. I had to come anew to it. And because of that, when we think about our children's needs, we sometimes find that there is a lack of research or guidance, which reflects the reality that we're in. Often we have national trends, but so often they differ from the trends that actually are in our schools. I remember that when boys' writing became a really huge focus in my school at that time, and particularly in my class, that wasn't the focus. For us, actually, it was a specific group of girls for whom writing was a really difficult thing. And there were a variety of directed interventions that particularly focused on boys' writing, but actually they weren't necessarily fit for purpose for those children in our school that needed intervention support for writing. So when you have that change and that difference between what your own children's needs and your school's needs are and those national trends, for me, the answer is then look for yourself and find that first-hand information, because then you get that first-hand powerful impact. And for research and whatever action comes from that, whatever intervention or strategy comes from that, for it to be impactful, it has to meet the needs of the children. Now, that's not to say that research that happens in a wider way isn't valid, because it is. And when we do our own in-school research, we should be looking at these models. We should be looking at these research processes to support and inform what we go on to do. And I really like this sort of model, that idea of that action research, because for us as teachers, this is what we do all the time. This is an innate part of our processes. When we're just planning an English lesson, a history lesson, a geography lesson, a lesson that amalgamates several of those things in one, we look for what the children need to learn. That's our problem. What do they need to learn? And we envisage the success of where we want them to get to. We create the plan. We then put the plan into action and we collect the information from that. Have they learnt it? And we analyse that, and then we look at what comes next. That's what's important about a sort of didactic teaching and planning in the moment and planning for those next steps. That actually it's no longer good enough to just plan weeks and weeks and weeks ahead, because actually what comes tomorrow might be quite different to what you thought. So this is a model that is so embedded, or should be embedded in my view, in the way that we teach and the way that we plan for our children to learn and develop. Why can't we do it on that slightly bigger scale beyond just planning for a lesson? So the identifying of the needs of the children is that starting point. And as a classroom teacher, particularly a primary classroom teacher, we get to know our children incredibly well. And in that, we therefore should be able to begin to look at what might support them in overcoming those problems or providing them with new strategies and new skills. So as a leader, I learned from previous. As a younger teacher, I had a head teacher that I worked for several years, for whom I felt was incredibly proactive in her support of staff in looking at research-based approaches. And she really developed a culture of research. And from both her example, but also my own experiences, I have 3 main tips that I feel are really important to share. So the first one is providing an ethos where our staff feel nurtured, where they can be confident in and being heard. And then when they have an interest in something, when they want to engage in research, that is what they can do. If we are very fixed in our mindset as senior leaders, that we have all the answers, actually we won't progress and move forward. We won't have a system within our school that is fit for the time that we're in, fit for the purpose of developing our own children. And therefore, in order to provide that opportunity, we have to provide that ethos. And for me, that is absolutely fundamental. As a head teacher, I want my staff to know that they can invest in and they can recommend, that they can research, and that they can make positive changes. The next one is to lead from the front. And in some respects, I think that you provide an ethos by doing that. If you engage others by undertaking those initial steps and that initial enthusiasm, and show them that it is possible to do these things and that actually we can have positive impact for our own children, then people are more likely to want to engage in it. And for me, that is a really important fundamental point. I'm not a person that sits in an office and, sort of every now and again tells people just what to do or expects them to do it all. I need to be in there with my children. I need to be seeing what's going on. I need to engage in the conversations. I need to see what the needs are, and I need to support in moving forward with those things. From the front for me is incredibly important. And then sometimes a really good way is to start small. Because when you have a colleague who's passionate about something or sees the benefit of something, or has got such a passion like I had for metacognition because they recognize the importance of that for their children, then allowing them to undertake a small scaled up across the school, if positive outcomes are seen, is a really great way to then allow the other staff to get on board. So a small example of this is a few years ago, my Year 5-6 lead wanted to look at verbal feedback strategies, particularly in maths, for our Year 5-6 children. So he started with his own class, and then we brought on board the other two teachers within his phase. Myself and the deputy head then looked at the positives that were coming from this. We did a pupil voice, we interviewed the teachers, we looked at planning, we looked at books, we looked at the progress the children were making, and the pupil voice in particular was so passionate about the benefits of the changes that were being brought in. And we used this as a starting point for the rest of the school to come on board. So they were able to show the positives of moving forward with verbal feedback in maths in the way that the phase leader had led this, that actually everybody could see the benefits for their own phases, their own year groups. And we then sort of looked at how that could be tweaked for the appropriate ages. And so starting small can be a really positive and informed way of then leading to whole school approaches about things. And the other thing about research is that sometimes it proves what doesn't work, and that can be just as important. But what our staff need is to know that the things that we're wanting them to do will have benefits for the children, because in turn that has benefits for them. And also the other way, it starts with benefits for them and leads to benefits for the children. But if they've got a vested interest because they've seen the need and they want their children to move forward, and that actually their own research can support that better than a national or an institutional research that doesn't quite fit the bill, then you are going to have better buy-in from your staff and better outcomes for your children. So what is the learning from taking this approach? Well, here are just a few pictures of children in my school over the last few years, learning in a variety of different ways, in school, out of school, sort of different mediums, different avenues for learning different things, different subjects, different ideas. For me, the benefit is that what we then can create for our children is more bespoke learning that enables them to grow and develop, not only achieve within the subjects and the assessments that we have within primary school, but actually grow and develop as lifelong learners, and to leave our primary school fitted to be learners in the next step of their education. And the evidence for me is that when it's right for the children, it will provide positive outcomes. I hope that's made sense. And I hope that it has enabled you to think about different things and provided you with some supportive tips. I sometimes find giving presentations to a screen with no feedback really quite difficult. But I look forward to seeing you on the 5th of May and answering any questions that you might have at that point. Thank you.